and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 35, Wednesday, March 4th, 2020.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and...
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back, listeners. I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined, as always, by my lovely co-host, Emily.
Hey there, hi there, ho there, listeners. You are as welcome as can be back to Book of the Mouse. So happy to be here.
Yeah, and today we're doing something a little different. We are pleased to welcome a special guest back to the show, and we were able to interview him about the countless Disney books he's written on episode 30, but today we get to hear a little more about his personal collection from other authors and how you can kind of curate your own collection for some books that might be on your bucket list. We're pleased to welcome back Jim Korkis.
Well, thank you, ladies. It's such a pleasure to be on this show. As I tell so many people, it's exciting to have a podcast that is just devoted to books. You know, I've always loved books ever since I was a little boy, and I love physical books. I love feeling the tactile feel of having a book in my hand. So it's wonderful that I'm going to get a chance to talk about books, but I think for some of the listeners, it's going to be exciting because they'll hear about maybe some books they didn't know existed, and for others, it'll be fairly frustrating because they'll go, I want those books. I want all of those books. And you just have to remember, as comedian Stephen Wright once said, you can't have everything. Where would you put it? You know, and even though I've been collecting Disney books for a couple of decades now, there are still massive gaps in my collection, and we have, new books coming out every week, it seems. So, but those who listen to this podcast, I know, always like that little something special, that little something that you can't find anywhere else. And so I've tried to work very hard to come up with some obscure books that are easy or fairly easy to locate and fairly reasonable in price. And then I'm also going to share some books that are going to be challenging to find. And once you find them, you may have to decide whether you want to eat peanut butter for lunch and dinner for 6 weeks in order to have the money to pay for them. But I know that a little later we'll talk about the philosophy of your personal Disney libraries. Of do you have a goal, or is it just, yes, I just want to get everything that I can find. And to give a little background of where I'm coming from, I'm in my living room right now, and in my living room I have 5 handmade bookcases that are each 7 feet tall and 4 feet wide. And they're handmade because I had to make sure that the shelves some of the shelves were tall enough to handle some Disney books, which are very high, and then some Disney books that are very, tiny and small. And in fact, in front of those bookcases are several 3-foot stacks of books, and these are Disney books and Disney-related books. And when I talk about Disney related books, that could be an entirely another podcast, but Disney-related books are things like books that might have a section about Disney. For instance, autobiographies of people like Hank Ketchum, who created Dennis the Menace, but he worked at the Disney Studios in the 40s. So he has 2 wonderful illustrated chapters of working at Disney and his opinions of Walt and what the process was. I have autobiography of movie director Ken Anakin, and he directed Disney films like Swiss Family Robinson and Third Man on the Mountain, and a film that not many people have seen, but the live-action version of Robin Hood. And so in that book, he's covering what it was like at the Disney studio when he was doing these films and interacting with Walt. And of course, there's animation books because those relate to Disney films and you want to get a perspective, and amusement park books and all of that. So when you're building your Disney collection, it's not just, well, let me get this book that's about Disney. Sometimes there's little hidden treasures in these books that you least expect that will give you some insight and some information and some stories about that. Now, before we start, ladies, what about your personal libraries? How did you start, and what was your philosophy behind what books you got? And do you have a particular treasure in your collection?
Sure, I can go ahead. This is Courtney. I feel like my collection has definitely grown since we started this podcast. I certainly had, I'd say maybe 7 or 8 Disney books on my shelf, but this was before I bought a house. So once you buy a house, you can fill the house with books, which is a great philosophy to have. But we've amassed plenty here. But I think I might have shared this when we talked about Disney A to Z, but I have a very special book in my collection for sentimental reasons. Dave Smith had published at least 5 editions of Disney A to Z, but when I was in middle school, I did a research project on Walt Disney, and like a good teacher, my mom took me to the library and she said, you're going to do your research here, and in the reference section was Disney A to Z. I want to say it was probably in its 2nd edition at that point, and I poured into that, did my little research, and it stuck with me. I think that's where a lot of my fandom for Disney stems from, diving into Walt the man. And when I got my first career-based role with the Walt Disney Company, I went on eBay and I tracked down that older version for myself to keep at my desk as a little reminder of where I started. What about you, Emily?
So, Courtney, I can really credit my Disney library to you because I really didn't have Disney books in my library. I also did a research project when I was in elementary school, but I cannot remember which biography of Walt Disney I read. It was not particularly long, and I think it came from my elementary school library, so it was catered towards probably up to 5th grade reading. But when I got my DCP acceptance and I was getting ready to go to my college program, I asked you, what podcast should I listen to? What should I do to get ready to go to my program? And not only did you give me podcasts and YouTube videos, but you also said I had to get Disney A to Z. So that's how I got that book in my collection, and that I needed to read the Bob Thomas biography, because there's no way I could go work for the Walt Disney Company without feeling like I knew the roots of this company and who I would be working for, and why Disney is the way it is because of Walt Disney. So those were my first 2, I would say, real Disney books. And then when I was in my college program, you hear things, and so you want to learn more. So I got the Walt Disney, a World War II book, Disney's animations in World War II. Ink and Paint got on my radar afterwards. I loved Oswald, so I got a book on Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. I'm looking at my library that's literally behind me because I moved. I'm actually surrounded by my books right now. But really, it's thanks to Courtney and this podcast, like you said, getting to meet authors. Jim, you've inspired us to buy and include a lot of new books in our collection, which is why
I
we're
hope
having
I
this
inspired
discussion
you
today.
to buy my book.
Absolutely.
But like Courtney said, now that I have more space, I'll probably be acquiring more books. But I have a lot of books now on my Kindle because I didn't have a lot of space, and because budgeting is a real life reality. So I have a variety now of both digital and paperback books. So that's an interesting philosophy also of trying to think about what books do you absolutely want in paper versus other ones that you're okay with reading digitally. We're in a very different time now for reading, that's an option.
Yes, and you also have to decide, as we start to talk about philosophy of collecting and all that, you also have to decide how obsessive you want to be. Courtney, I've talked with you too about, yes, one of my favorites is Walt Disney, An American Original by Bob Thomas. And one of the reasons it's a favorite, and one of the reasons I recommend it to other people is that, first off, Bob Thomas was a very good writer, a very accessible writer. Also, he knew Walt Disney personally. And when it came time to write the biography, Thomas had something that no other writer has ever had, and that was complete access to everyone at the Disney studio and complete access to everyone in the Disney family. No other writer has ever had that. And so what I like about it is that Thomas is very truthful. He doesn't tippy-toe around things. But again, he doesn't, make a big tabloid issue about that. And speaking of being obsessive, I love that book, and I tracked down the UK edition. And the UK edition is actually titled The Walt Disney Biography. And it was published by the New English Library. And one of the reasons I wanted that is it's a larger size. It's 9 inches by 12 inches. So it's about as tall as the Michael Broggie book on Walt Disney and steam trains. And there are new photos in the UK edition than in the American edition. And the older photos that were pulled from the American edition are cropped differently. So you can see more of the image or a different part of the image. And I would hope, but I don't think this is the case, that the children's biography that Courtney read, and there are dozens of children's biographies. You could spend an entire podcast on them. But one that I recommend is Walt Disney, Magician of the Movies, by Bob Thomas, that was published by Grosset and Dunlap in 1966. You can get it in a hardcover, and I also convinced Bob McLean of Theme Park Press to reprint it. So there is a complete reprinted version that was released in 2016. And what is exciting about that book to me is, again, it was meant for young people, so it's focusing on Walt as a young man. And when Bob Thomas thought he was just going to have to cut and paste from previous interviews he had done with Walt, when Walt found out about that, he did 4 new interviews with Bob Thomas just for that book. And so there are stories in that book that didn't make it into Walt Disney, An American Original, simply because there wasn't room. You can't spend your entire book talking about Walt Disney as a young man. You got to plan. Well, I've got these other stories that we've got to get to, and you two ladies, and probably. Most of the people who are listening to this podcast are just extremely lucky, because when I was growing up, there were less than a dozen books that focused on Disney. In fact, there were so few books that I was able to buy 2 copies of each, so I could keep one in mint condition, and then the other I would, put in notes and write corrections and additions, and I would highlight things, just like a school textbook, and 2 of those books are still available today. The Christopher Finch's The Art of Walt Disney, and Leonard Maltin's The Disney Films, because there weren't really any books out there, that really focused just on Disney. These were just, oh my gosh, what a gift, what a gift to have that now,
I think we'd have a short podcast with just 12 books, and it's over. We wouldn't be on episode 35.
No, because if you invited me, I could talk for the entire podcast
True.
on just one of those books, and now you're getting into that thing of, well, yes, I'm going to buy that book. What version do you buy? So if you're going to buy Disney A to Z, probably it makes most sense to buy the most recent edition because it's got additional information in it. In the Finch book has been revised and expanded 4 times over the years since its first release in 1973. So if you buy the most recent version that was in 2011, every chapter has been reworked. There's more pages. There's information on Pixar, but be very careful if you look for the Christopher Finch book because there's concise paperback editions as well, and those will have fewer pages. And Christopher Finch also wrote a really great book on Winnie the Pooh because Christopher Finch's full name is Christopher Robin Finch. He was named after Christopher Robin in the book, so that inspired him to be a writer. Now, the Disney films, I just have great respect for Leonard Maltin. He's a good friend, and he just really created an entire career for himself. And he's interested in a lot of things other than just Disney, but he wrote the Disney films because he felt there should be a book that lists all the feature films. So he went to, press books and newspaper accounts and all of that because in those days, when he first wrote the book, there was no internet and certainly no access to the Disney archives. And so he published this book, and it was just magnificent. And Leonard was telling me he was heartbroken because he got a letter from Disney archivist Dave Smith. It was a 14-page, single-spaced letter listing the errors. And mostly all of those errors were pretty much nomenclature. Like, is the title of the film 101 Dalmatians, or can you write it out 101 Dalmatians? According to Smith, you can't. It's 101 Dalmatians, 101 Dalmatians. So if you buy the 4th edition of Maltin's book, published in 2000, you get all the corrections. And since the book first appeared in 1973, and the final chapter is updated because the final chapter is films after Walt, so that's updated. It's like if you buy the 3rd edition of Richard Schickel's the Disney version because you've heard about that and you're curious and all of that. And Schickel was going to write the very first biography of Walt Disney, and he did something that he got kicked out of the Disney studio, and so he had to interview people who were no longer working at the Disney studio, and some of them had real axes to grind. And so the Disney version is not a real balanced look at Walt. But what's interesting in the 3rd edition is there's a new 8-page introduction that he wrote about how amazed he is that people are still talking about this book 30 years after he wrote it, and that, yeah, he was probably too hard on Walt, looking back on that. So you've got the original content there, but you've also got that little extra bit. And I know what people are thinking out there who are listening. They're saying, oh, well, what Jim is saying is you've got to buy the latest edition, to get your best value. And of course, that is absolutely wrong.
When you're a collector, you need to collect them all.
Well, let me give you a very specific example. In 1996, Beth Dunlap, and she was a the architecture critic for the Miami Herald newspaper, and she wrote a lot of articles about architecture and all that. 1996, she wrote the first edition, Building a Dream, The Art of Disney Architecture. Wonderful book, published by Abrams in 1996. And again, Disney architecture is tremendous because it tells stories, and and that's her approach in the book. However, 15 years later, in 2011, she revised and updated the entire book, but uses the exact same title. So the first version is in portrait format. Portrait format, for those people who don't know what that means, is if you were taking a photo of somebody and it's their portrait. So you can see what that looks like. 15 years later, the new edition with the exact same title, the exact same author, is in landscape. Landscape is where it's stretched out so you can see that. And the 2011 edition includes a foreword by Tom Staggs and Bruce Vaughan. See, you need this information when you're trying to track these down. And while the books share many similarities, there's real significant differences. In the first edition, at least half the photos are in black and white. The newer edition is just filled with full-color photos, sometimes several to a page. And so if what you're looking for, and we can talk about, what should you focus on, when you're collecting books, if you just like looking at pictures and all, you want that. And the first book was much more of an homage to the accomplishments of former CEO Michael Eisner, who was a patron of architecture. And, in the new version, he's still acknowledged as a key instigator in Disney getting involved with entertainment architecture outside of the parks, for the resorts, for the Team Disney building, things like that. But he's not as prominently featured as he is in the first book, which was done when he was alive and he was in charge. The Dunlap book has a really good index, which is rare in a lot of Disney books, and several pages of a bibliography. So it's like, well, Jim, which copy do you have? Well, obviously, I'm obsessive. I have both editions on my personal library bookshelf because there's new information in both, and it's like one of the treasures in my collection because I saw it in a library. I saw it in the Glendale Public Library when I was growing up, and it was like, oh, when I grow up, I want this book. And it's another book by Bob Thomas. It's called The Art of Animation. And, of course, if the listeners have really been listening, they're going, okay, Jim, obviously there's a catch. Which edition are you talking about? And what are the changes in the later editions? And do I need to get all of them? When Walt was producing the animated feature Sleeping Beauty, he did several things to help promote the film. He had a traveling exhibit that actually went around the world with artwork from Sleeping Beauty to show how an animated film is put together and all that. And then he had Bob Thomas put together a book called The Art of Animation. And they had been talking about doing that book at the studios, for years. At one point, Donald Graham, who was an instructor from Chouinard and who was teaching classes at Disney, was going to write it, and he started writing it, and Walt didn't like it because it was, too technical. The Disney Archive still has that copy of that unpublished book, as well as a lot of unpublished manuscripts, including the first two biographies of Walt Disney by Richard Hubler and later the second one by Lawrence Watkin that they commissioned to be written, and they didn't like either of them, and then they went to Bob Thomas. But those unpublished manuscripts are in the Disney Archives. So anyway, the version of Art of Animation that I saw that I loved is a dust-jacketed version that was released by Simon & Schuster in 1958, and then later there was an edition without a dust jacket, but with a black cover decorated with brightly colored film strips of Disney characters, and that was released by Golden Press, and that's the one that's most common out there, and the one that you're most likely to be able to find. And it's an incredible book. It gives, for the very first time in any Disney book, it gives official credit to the artists and what things they worked on, at the studio, and it features the very first photo of the 9 old men and identifying them as the 9 old men. And it's an incredible insight into how animation was produced, in the 40s and 50s, and the people who were involved, and there's some wonderful stories. Well, in 1991, Thomas updated the book, and the title is still The Art of Animation, but this time it's printed by Hyperion Press, and of course, Sleeping Beauty is now a 30-year-old movie. So they gut all of the information on Sleeping Beauty and the making of Sleeping Beauty. They retain some of the history of animation information, but that's only about half the book. The other half of the book is devoted to the making of Beauty and the Beast.
Ooh, my favorite.
Yes, so if you love Beauty and the Beast, there's artwork, there's information, there's interviews that you might not find anywhere else. Now, to make this even more interesting, in 1997, Thomas updated the book again, but it still kept the title, The Art of Animation, and it's still from Hyperion Press. But what happened is, hey, Beauty and the Beast is an old film now, so they get rid of all of the making of the Beauty and the Beast information. They still retain some of the early history, and they also have a new chapter on recent Disney animated features, but half of the book now is dedicated to the making of Hercules, which I think is an underappreciated film that people are going to reevaluate in a few years when they look at it. So all 3 editions are on my library shelf because they each contain different information. And again, I've always been interested in Disney animation, but there's some people out there that aren't interested in Disney animation. They're only interested, and again, that brings us to the philosophy of collecting. What do you want, in your collection? Do you want just a general overview, or do you want some essential books that you can trust and use for reference? Do you want to focus on a single topic like Disney theme parks or Disney animation or Disney history, or do you want to even narrow it down even further? I have friends who just only collect books about Disneyland, or books that are related, just to Walt Disney. What is the purpose of? You have to decide. What is the purpose of your library? What books do you want? And then also you're going to have to make a decision too of, how much are you willing to pay?
Yeah, I think the variations really do make it hard to decide what to collect, but I'd like to pause on that for a moment and maybe kind of talk about what we choose to collect. Emily, how would you define your collection?
Oh, my collection is like if a bookstore and a toy shop exploded, and I'm just walking around the remains. That's pretty much. Again, I've always loved books, and I've always loved Disney. And in some ways, as a writer, I can justify, getting as many different types of books as I can, so that I can use that as reference, so that I can use that to give me a different perspective. I have 6 books that are just solely dedicated, different books dedicated to Disney watches. And that's not even including other books that have a chapter or 2 devoted to Disney watches. In fact, one of the books I have called Time to Rewind just covers Disney Ingersoll watches from 1932 to 1939. That's all it covers, but it covers every watch and all the details and all of that. And I've also I'm a knowledge information hound, so I love that. I have 8 separate books that concentrate just on the original Mickey Mouse Club TV show, and that's not counting the other books that might have a chapter or two, about that. So my collection is very eclectic, but on the shelves, I've organized them in those sections, so all the books about Disneyland are on one shelf, and all the ones about Walt Disney World, and all the ones about Disney Animation, and then all the ones about Walt, and there are dozens and dozens of children's biographies of Walt, and some of them are just horrendous.
Oh, goodness.
And maybe sometime in the coming years we can talk about those and what ones that are good you should get, and what ones you should avoid. I have one children's biography where the story of Walt Disney is told by a talking drawing brush, and I have another one that is done all up as a comic book. So there's a lot of things. Unfortunately, my collection is unfocused at best. It's like, let me get these things. For instance, I have a book in my collection that is 3 inches by 2 inches, and it was approved by Disney. There's only 300 copies. It's called Mickey's Jubilee, and it's about the history of Mickey Mouse. And Dave Smith was explaining to me, because I brought it to him, and I said, Dave, what is this all about? And he said, there's some people who just collect miniature books. So there's some places that just produce miniature books. And this one was produced for that limited group of collectors. And he said, so where did you find it? And I said, well, I read a notice in the LA Times that this one bookstore had such and such, and so I went down to the bookstore, and that's what I got. But and in fact, what I'm waiting for in the mail right now is a book which is called The Ghost of Walt Disney and Me. And the me doesn't refer to the author. What the author did is he went and he interviewed members of the Disney family and people who worked at the Disney studio and all of that, if they ever had an experience with the spirit of Walt after he passed away.
That's
and
so
the guy
interesting.
Who wrote the book,
such an interesting topic.
And the guy who wrote the book is, a very popular, ghost hunter who, has been on TV shows like Oprah and all of that, and he's written other books and all of that. But since he's Southern California based, he was just fascinated by Walt Disney, and so he went around and started asking, is there, he was at the Disney Family Museum, and he talked to Diane, and he said, Walt's here. And she said, what do you mean? He was never, in this building or whatever. And he said, look, you have things like his shaving case and his glasses and all of that, and that will attract, spirits, because those are, and he says his spirit is here, and he's very happy about what you've done. And Diane broke into tears.
Aww.
So whether you believe in ghosts or not, to me, it's like, I think that would be an interesting addition to my collection.
Absolutely.
So I think a lot of our collections are like yours, Jim, where, or at least for me, mine's also not quite focused, but I think that's more because I'm such a new Disney book collector. Like we said earlier, this podcast is really what launched Courtney and I, that most of the books I have now is because of either recommendations from authors like you or authors that reach out to us. But also when I look at Amazon, because maybe I'm buying this book for our next episode, but then it says, ooh, listener or people also bought, and then I start clicking and going through the Amazon rabbit hole. But you wanted to talk about...
And in fact, that's places. The same for me. I'll take a look and they say people who bought this book also looked at these, and I'll start looking at those.
but what are some other places? So a lot of people know to go to Amazon.
Okay,
I don't even count Barnes & Noble out right now because their Disney shelf, I feel like, keeps getting smaller and smaller. So Amazon's been my go-to place. But what are some other places that, if you're really trying to build your library, we should be going to?
Okay, well, obviously, what you need to do is know what books even exist out there. I'm constantly stumbling across books, even Disney books, that were printed within the last 2 to 3 years. I had never heard anything about them at all, and just by accident. So I would recommend to people the Ultimate Disney Book Network by Didier Getz. Didier Getz has been a long time Disney historian and writer. He's been around probably about the same amount of time as I have, and he's a good friend. And he actually writes his own books, like Walt's People, which is up to volume 22. Walt's People is a series of books that include interviews done with people who worked, at Disney. And then Didier has done some individual books, like Walt Disney's Grand Tour, which is about Walt's trip overseas in 1935 to Europe, and that supposedly is the basis for the Riviera Resort at Walt Disney World. And he's also the author of a series of books called They Drew as They Pleased, where he covers by decade the art in Disney animated films. And so what he's done is he's created a site that will list the books, and he actually breaks them down into categories. So there's children's biographies of Walt, and foreign books, and books on theme parks, and things like that. And not only does he list the books that are in print and the books that are out of print, but he has a section where he lists books that have been announced that are coming that you might want to put on your wish list. Now, Didier is not perfect. Even he misses a lot of these books. And so I will, when I stumble across one, I will talk to him, and if he goes, oh, well, and so I'll get him a copy of the book, or I'll turn him on. One of the ones I did was a book by Jeff Curdy, who is one of my favorite Disney writers. I love Jeff Curdy and J.B. Kaufman and Jim Fanning. There's a lot of really good Disney writers out there who have done multiple books. Brian Sibley. Jeff Curdy is one of the big ones. So in my collection is a book on Sleeping Beauty Castle. Came out in 2014. It's a 48-page paperback book with a square spine there. It has full-color photos, all of that. It's typical Curdy work, where it's very well researched. There's quotes from people that he's talked with. The problem that nobody ever heard about this book is it was released by Sterling Innovation Publishing as part of the Build Sleeping Beauty Castle kit, which was a deluxe paper model kit where you make a Sleeping Beauty Castle. It came with LED lights. There was a background panel of Disney fireworks. There was step-by-step instructions, whatever. And in it has this book. And there's a huge disclaimer on the book that says not to be sold separate from this kit. And it's roughly about 8 by 5 is the size of the book, and it's called Disney Build Sleeping Beauty Castle. And it's a wonderful book about the history of Sleeping Beauty Castle. In fact, one of the color photos in there that I absolutely love is of the Notre Dame spire that is on Sleeping Beauty Castle that Walt wanted there. And of course, Jeff is so prolific, he can drive you crazy, because one of the books that I think most people don't know is that in 1997 he wrote a book called The Art of the Little Mermaid. And Jeff has written lots of art of, this movie type books for Disney. However, The Art of the Little Mermaid is a miniature book, only 4 inches by 4 inches. And it's 192 pages, but only 30 of them are about the making of the film and concept art. The rest of the book is screen caps from the film, retelling the story of the film. Now, originally it sold for $11. Amazon currently has it on sale for $100 or more. So you really have to be a big fan of Little Mermaid to want to add that, to your collection. But there are some people that, yes, of course, that's exactly what I want. Now, what drove me crazy is that several years ago when they had the Blue Sky Cellar at Disney California Adventure, which was a section where they're showing displays for upcoming things, and they had a display for the upcoming Ariel's Undersea Adventure attraction that was there, and in one of the display cases is a full-size copy of The Art of the Little Mermaid, and by Jeff Curtis. And I'm going crazy. And so immediately when I got home, I contacted Jeff and I said, was there a full-size version of this book? All I've got is the little mini. And Jeff said, no, it was only the miniature. It had to be done for legal reasons. And, so we did that. He said, what you saw at the Blue Sky Cellar was just a mock-up, because putting the little miniature version wasn't going to be very impressive. But I wonder how many people went into that display and go, I've got to track down that full-size copy of The Art of the Little Mermaid from my collection. It's things like that drive you crazy.
Well, and especially when it's behind a case, not quite a book, but the Orlando Library downtown, which is our main library hub, had a vinyl record of the Epcot Center album, and I was like, I just want to open the case so bad, but I was able to find it on eBay for myself after months of looking. And I think sometimes that can be like this collection with the book. You have to set up those alerts on eBay for what you're trying to find. But I also wanted to bring up a website you and I had talked about over email that I'm also familiar with as well, and that's Abe Books, which is where people are you'll find a lot of previously owned, but it lists the conditions. I had
and bookfinder.com as well. And what those sites do is they are connected to over 100,000 independent booksellers. So these are people who might not be able to advertise on Amazon, know how to do it, or know what entails, or would offer them on eBay, because eBay is really like gambling in Las Vegas. What you're gambling on, if you put something up on eBay, is that somebody, that week or 2 weeks, will be looking at eBay and be looking for that, and it's at a price that they want, but it can disappear. It can disappear off of eBay. Whereas bookfinder.com and abebooks.com, those are there. And again, they will list, if that book is available, they'll list all the bookstores that have it and the price, so that you can comparison shop, And again, that's that question: how much are you willing to spend? And remember, when you're answering that question, it's not just yes, this is worth it for me. Yes, this is worth it for me, so that I don't have to look for this again. Or I've been looking for this for years. I've got to get this now, because it may be years before I see another copy of this being offered, So you pays your money and you takes your chance.
Very true.
So Jim, you gave us 3 titles of books that you really want to talk about. I'm most intrigued by Justice for Disney by Bill Justice. Can you tell us a little bit about that book and why, if you can find a copy,
I'll tell you about all 3. I was trying to find, some books that people can easily find and at a reasonable price. So, for instance, that Jeff Curdy Sleeping Beauty Castle book, you can find that for $20 or less, as you look around. But there are some books that are going to be more of a challenge for you. And once upon a time, the Walt Disney Company allowed certain former employees to publish a book about their experiences and to use Disney images, but only if they limited the publication to a one-time print run of less than 1,000 copies. And that's because there's some type of legal restriction that by limiting it to 1,000 copies or less, you're not infringing on Disney copyrights, and you're not negatively impacting Disney's contracts with other publishers, including Disney Editions. So these are people who, really made a contribution to Disney. So here's some books, less than 1,000 copies each out there. And so you can put this down on your wish list. We'll start with Justice for Disney, since that's the one you're interested in. That was published in 1992 by Tomart Publications. Tomart is Tom Tumbrush, who did the Disneyana magazine, Slick magazine, that was out there for years and years. Tom passed away, unfortunately, last year. Tom's also the guy who put together the pin collecting guides. Here's all these pins and here's what they're worth. And so what happened is Bill Justice, and for those who don't know Bill Justice, he was a very talented animator, best known for his work on Chip and Dale characters, but he worked on Disney animated features as well, a lot of the Donald Duck cartoons. Walt later moved him over to Imagineering, where he was the programmer of audio animatronics for Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion and Country Bear Jamboree, among other things. He's led a wonderfully colorful life. I was really honored to get to know him and spend time with him. And I took a look at his original manuscript, and it was just all over the place. And so Tom Tumbrush and Bob Wellbaum did a wonderful job of wrangling it into a terrific book, so it makes sense, and it really tells the story and captures the warmth and modesty of him. It's a 168-page book. It has a foreword by Leonard Moulton, and almost every page has illustrations, usually artwork that Bill created specifically to relate to the text. And of course, as with all of these books done by Disney legends, there's so many stories that I heard him tell that didn't make it into the book. But again, wonderful book to have. And of course, there aren't 1,000 copies out there, because I have 2 of them. and Bill autographed both of those. Now, another is called One of Walt's Boys by Harry Teitel. Harry Teitel was a producer of films at the Disney Studios. He was Walt's assistant for a while. He came up with the original idea for the Aristocats, for instance. And at the Disney Studios, especially when Walt was alive, you were either classified as one of Walt's boys or one of Roy's boys, which meant that you either worked in the creative section or you worked in finance and mechanics and things like that, and you weren't supposed to fraternize. This is this domain and that's that domain. That's it. The only one who crosses over is Walt. And so Teitel was one of Walt's boys. Now, I know exactly that there was only 750 copies that were printed. This is in hardcover. And, well, actually 750 copies with a blue cover, which was the mass release edition. There were 50 copies that was the exact same cover, but it's in red. And that's because those are autographed by title. It's like the Bob Gurr book, Design for Fun. There's the general release book, which is in blue, but there was a special limited number set aside that had the exact same cover, but in red, because Bob did that. This is a 241-page hardcover book, and title kept a diary. So when he's writing this, he's able to pull from his diary entries at the time. And he's telling stories that, again, don't appear in any other Disney book. You know, there's a whole several pages talking about Walt determining whether they were going to stop doing Goofy cartoons or not, you know, for a variety of reasons. So again, one of the reasons I get all of these books is it gives me all of this information, and everybody thinks I'm so smart and I'm so clever.
You are.
It's just, well, when guest relations started at Disneyland, Walt went and told the guest relations hostesses, I only expect two things of you. Know the answers or know where to go to get the answers. And so, you know, so when I do my writing, that's why, you know, I go to this extensive library to go and try and check and, you know, find things. And then the third book people should be looking for, and again, this, and by the way, Design for Fun was less than 1,000 pages too, less than 1,000 printed copies. And I talked with Bob about that, and I said, Bob, everybody loves this and it's sold out. You should, you know, you should do another, you know, a printing of it. And he says, I can't do another printing of it. And he says, you probably know why. And so he came out with another book that's out there now about him, but it has no illustrations in it whatsoever. Design for Fun has great illustrations, every, you know, single page. Anyway, the third book is Disney's Giant and the Artist's Model by Adrian Teitler, and it came out in 2004. Now, Adrian was the wife of Bill Teitler, and Bill Teitler is a legendary animator. And if you're an animator, he's one of the people that you look at and you study his work. He was the key animator on Chernabog in Fantasia, and Stromboli in Pinocchio, and little baby Dumbo, you know, in Dumbo. And one of the reasons he was so, you know, he did these villains, why is Walt giving him, you know, baby Dumbo to do? It's because he knew that he and Adrian had just gotten married. They had a little 2-year-old boy, Peter, and so Peter was the inspiration for a lot of the Dumbo stuff. One night, Bill came home and he was just really tired and frustrated, and he saw Adrian bathing Peter in the sink, and the kitchen sink. And so that inspired that whole scene of Dumbo in the tub. That's where that came from. It is from the experiences that, and again, all of this is recorded in an issue of Time magazine at the time. You know, now Adrian announced when Bill died in 1968 that she was writing a book called The Wonderful World of Willie T. William Teitler, and that would cover this, and we're all out there and we're all waiting for this book to come out, and oh my gosh, you know, and she's got all of this stuff, and it took until 2004 for the book to come out. And the book is not, it's like a hodgepodge scrapbook. It's the size of a telephone book, so it's over 1,000 pages. And what it is it has the notes, you know, for the book she was going to write, but it also has photos, it has newspaper clippings, it has letters there's several pages of letters where Teitler is talking with Walt Kelly, another Disney artist who went on to create Pogo, about doing an hour-long Pogo animated special, for TV. Nobody's ever heard of that. The only place that information exists is in this book, and there's the letters. So if you look at it as a scrapbook, with all these little treasures for you to go through, because some pages have like little arrows drawn and curves and things like this. So, don't think of it as like a regular book, but oh my gosh, what a delight, and what an insight into Bill Teitler. And Adrian, of course, met Bill because she was a life drawing model at the Disney studio, and Bill, being Bill, asked her out, and that's how that story happened. But those are just three of the obscure books that are also going to be maybe a little pricey for you. So you're going to have to decide. And just because a book is rare, it doesn't mean that you should be paying money on it. In 2003, there's a book that came out called The Art of the Haunted Mansion by Jason Sorrell, who's another writer that I just love. And I'm sure that some of you have some of his books in your library. He wrote one on the Haunted Mansion from the Magic Kingdom to the movies, and he wrote one on pirates, and he wrote one on the Disney mountains. And Jason now is no longer with Imagineering. He's with Universal Creative. That's a whole other story. But anyway, I got a chance to talk with him about the book because I had never seen the book. I had only heard about the book, and it was selling for like $200 to $400. And so I talked to him, and he said basically when the Eddie Murphy movie was released, Disney Editions put together this limited number of copies. And he didn't know what the final number of copies were, but a limited number of copies of this special hardcover book, which again is like 9 by 12, to highlight the work of the people who worked on the makeup and the sets and the special effects and the costumes in hopes of generating some Oscar nominations. It didn't. And it was primarily circulated to those who might cause those nominations to happen. That's not unusual. When it comes Academy Award time, certain film studios will send out screener copies, to people and little gift baskets and things like that, to draw attention. And so most of the book is just filled. It's 147 pages long, and that's maybe a little misleading because some pages are practically blank with just sort of a faded, ghostly image sometimes on them. Mostly it's just filled with photos, from the set of the film. And, of course, Sorrell wrote text, and he said, look, if you got my Haunted Mansion book, you don't need to get the Art of the Haunted Mansion book because, there's nothing new in there. But there are quotes from people like, producer Don Hahn and director Rob Minkoff and, Rick Baker, who did makeup, and Jay Reed, who did visual effects and whatever. And the book is divided into, 5 chapters, the mansion, the wardrobe, the gallery, the makeup, and the library. And so Jason told me, he said, look, I've seen this book go for outrageously high prices, and it's not worth that type of price unless you are just seriously a fan of this movie, which I am not, or the work of people like Rick Baker, and I am a fan of Rick Baker, but I wouldn't pay $200 to $400. I was able to get my copy because, again, one of the things you have to do is you have to hunt around, and you have to be patient, and you have to keep looking. And I was able to find a copy for less than $100. And for less than $100, I felt I got good value out of the book, not just for, all of that information, but for nani bragging rights, so that when other Disney historians or fans, and I go, "Oh, do you have a copy of The Art of the Haunted Mansion? Here's my copy." You know, so you have to make, many of those decisions. What am I going to get? What is it worth? And what am I going to, use this for?
So you found that one. Are you willing to share the one Disney book you've been looking for a decade and still can't find? Because you never know, maybe a listener can help.
Well, that's what I'm hoping, because I debated about this. You never want to tell people about books that you're looking for, because now you create that whole group of people who are going to outbid you, and take up all those.
They're going to hold it for ransom and send you a magazine cutout note if you want to see this book.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Holding a flamethrower. What's next to the book? Pay me this money, or the book dies. Yes, there is. Actually, there are lots of books that I'm still looking for, but this is, for those of you right now who are listening to the show and go, "Well, you old show-off, you have all the Disney books. Good for you, good for you." No, I don't have all the Disney books, and I try to use that information to share it with others through my books and through columns and all that. But there's one book that I've been tracking down for over a decade, and sometimes I've come close, and then it just disappears. Didier has said, "Jim, I think it just doesn't exist. You shouldn't even be looking for it." And I said, "No, there's all of these clues there." Roy Williams was the big musketeer on the original television Mickey Mouse Club. And one of the reasons he was called Musketeer is because he was a football player in school, and he was called Moose because he was so big. And he was a gag man on the Disney animated short cartoons in the 30s and the 40s. And he's the one who came up with the idea of mouse ears, that are now sold at Disneyland. He's the one who came up with that. And in fact, when he passed away, he was buried in his Mickey Mouse Club sweatshirt with his name on it and his mouse ears. So anyway, Williams was a gag man, and he wrote and drew one-panel cartoons for magazines like The New Yorker, Saturday Evening Post, Collier's, True, Liberty, all of the magazines at the time, and they bought his work. And there are two compilations of these cartoons. So if you're interested in what he was like, because he also used to draw at Disneyland, drawings of Mickey and Pluto and all that for free for guests that were coming there in the 50s. So there are two compilations of these cartoons that you could track down. The hardcover book, How's the Back View Coming, which was from Dutton in 1949, and the paperback, The Secret World of Roy Williams by Bantam Books, 1957, which he dedicates to Walt. And apparently after that book came out, Walt and his brother Roy pulled Williams aside and said, "Look, don't submit any more gag cartoons to magazines, because you might be giving away, gags that we could use in the Disney shorts." And so Williams, who just worshipped Walt, stopped immediately. He did publish a book of poetry. I don't have that out there. And the book that I have been trying to track down for over a decade, an autobiography. Now, the reason I know it's out there is because I contacted his daughter, and his daughter confirmed that it existed, but the family did not have a copy, because when Williams passed away, he was estranged from his family. That's a whole other story there. But and a copy was seen at the library at Feature Animation Florida before it was, before they closed down the whole annex studio there. And one of the animators there, because I didn't have access to the Feature Animation Florida studio, it's like trying to get into Fort Knox or something. But in the library there, he saw it, and it had a yellow cover, and it had a caricature on the front of Roy Williams, done by Roy Williams, and he couldn't remember a lot other than, there were some great stories, like including the story of what happened, after Snow White, was finally released. Walt decided, to let the animators blow off some steam, so he rented a hotel for the weekend and brought them down, and there was free food and there was booze, and Walt came down with Lillian, and he left within the first couple of hours because they really did started blowing off steam, tossing ink and paint girls into the pool. Fred Moore was on the second floor balcony, and he was so drunk he saw this foliage, and he thought he was on the first floor, so he walked off the balcony because the foliage was the top of a tree. And then the next Monday at work, Walt says, "We are never talking about this party ever again, ever." Yes, under penalty of being dismissed from the company. But apparently Roy Williams talks about all of this, and now to make this even, more painful, his daughter has granted permission that it can be reprinted if a copy ever surfaces.
Oh no, it's like we're so close to having it, but so far.
And again, maybe people who are listening out there, you never know. Sometimes books pop up. Apparently this was self-published, so there's probably not a lot of copies out there. And just like his poetry book was self-published, and I've never seen that, and I don't know what's in that, but I can't imagine him being much of a poet. But in the past, I've sometimes found things in libraries where they were miscatalogued, or as we did with the Bob Thomas Walt Disney and American Original, it suddenly the British edition has a different title, so you never know, or maybe somebody who's listening to that goes, yes, my grandfather knew Roy, and he has a copy of that, and I'm holding this flamethrower right next to it. But yes, that's one of the books that I have been looking for a decade, and it just frustrates me. And, there's always new things to discover. And those of you who are listening to this podcast and have been desperately scribbling down titles and things like this, and are going, oh, heck, I have to listen to this a second time to try and get these. Remember, you can't have everything, and sometimes it's the thrill of the hunt that is, worth doing, and there's always new surprises, and I am constantly being surprised all the time of things that are, just 2 months ago, I was surprised by the Walt Disney Treasury Donald Duck Volume 1, released in 2011 by Kaboom. It publishes some Donald Duck stories done by Don Rosa, who a lot of people consider the successor to Carl Barks when it comes to telling stories of Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck. Well, in this volume was a story that I never even knew existed. It's a story that Rosa wrote and penciled in 1989 for the opening of Disney MGM Studios. It's a 10-page story called The Starstruck Duck, where Donald goes with his nephews to Disney MGM Studios to try to get Mickey Mouse's autograph. And part of the fun is that he is stumbling through all of these things that are there at the studio, the stunt show, all of these attractions that were there on opening day. And then for some reason, Disney decided, no, we're not going to publish that story. And so there it is. There it is. Nobody's seen it since 1989, and here's published in this book. And again, volume one, because there's also a volume 2 and all of those other things. So you need to try and find all of those clues you can about, dates and publishers and all of that to make sure you get the right version of what you want. And of course, I would always suggest go to themeparkpress.com, because Bob, I've talked to Bob and had Bob, I've led him to Disney books that are out of print so that he would reprint them, like the Walt Disney Magician of the movies. And but he's got a huge catalog of books that cover, just about everything. And as a special for this podcast, my latest book is coming out before Easter. It is called Hidden Treasures of the Disney Cruise Line: Nautical Notes, Knowledge, and Nonsense. And this is not about getting a discount on the cruise or getting the best stateroom or what shore excursions, because that's not how I roll. What it is it's the entire history of how the Disney Cruise Line was created, including cruises that Walt took, including Eisner's. There's a whole chapter devoted to Eisner's plan to put an entire Disney theme park on an oil tanker and then have it sail to different ports around the world. And also, it's what are the storytelling elements on the ship and on Castaway Cay that you might have missed. And the book has been enriched because Courtney, of all people, helped me find one piece of a missing puzzle, and that is included in the book, and she is acknowledged in that book. But again, what I'm hoping is that even people who have never taken a Disney cruise might be interested in the storytelling of the Disney Cruise Line and the storytelling of all the connections Disney has had with cruise ships like the Queen Mary and the Port Disney project that was going to be built down in Long Beach and all that. And that will be coming out before Easter. And then coming out before summer will be Secret Stories of Walt Disney World. Extinct Walt Disney World. Remember on the previous podcast, I said you've got to vote with your wallet if you want books. And a lot of people liked Secret Stories of Extinct Disneyland, which covered attractions and shows and things that no longer exist at Disneyland. So the sequel, Secret Stories of Extinct Walt Disney World, covering everything from a Studer computer review to Pocahontas's Forest Friends to whatever, will be in that book that'll be out by this summer. Thank you for letting me plug those books, which you can get at themeparkpress.com and amazon.com while you're looking for these other books I told you about.
And they're not as hard to find as some of the others you've listed. So we're excited to add those to the collection. I am thrilled to be acknowledged in the book. I mean, certainly a way to guarantee that I will buy it, but I would have bought it anyway because we had such a good time on that cruise that we happened to both be on. And you've been a wonderful resource to point us to our next book and our next interview, which I'll allow Emily to introduce for us.
Yeah, so our next episode is another special interview that, thanks to you, Jim, was made possible because you connected us to Margaret Carey, the performer who is the live model and actress for Tinkerbell in Walt Disney's Peter Pan. Her book, Tinkerbell Talks, is all about her time as a performer and also working with Walt and the Walt Disney Company. So the description on the back of the book reads, Tinkerbell Talks, Tales of a Pixie-Dusted Life is a memoir of Margaret Carey and the magic of being Walt Disney's Tinkerbell, a Hollywood kid performer who turns into a Hollywood grown-up entertainer and storyteller. Dozens of showbiz photos, including rare Little Rascals images, along with unique artwork, keep things even more interesting. The book is a dance through a life that's always been tempered with faith, trust, and, of course, pixie dust.
And it took Margaret nearly 2 decades to produce that book. So I'll be listening in to hear her tell all the different variations that she tried that didn't work. And again, this is not one of those books that just has that section of her in 52 working as Tinkerbell. What it also covers is later in the book, the reaction of when she's going to conventions and people see her as Tinkerbell and how she feels a great responsibility to keep the spirit of Tinkerbell alive. So, and she's just a fascinating woman.
We are very much looking forward to that and can't thank you enough for connecting us. If you would like to stay connected to us, both you and our listeners, you can find us on Instagram and Twitter at Book of the Mouse, or email us with comments or ideas to bookofthemouseclub@gmail.com. You can follow me, Courtney, on Instagram at GreatGuthsby, or on Twitter at Courtney_Guth.
And you can follow me, Emily, on both Instagram and Twitter on the same handle at Emily_McD. Jim, remind us how we can keep up with you and how people can get to your books.
Stay away from me. I've got too many books to read, you know. And you're going to come to my house and steal the Art of the Haunted Mansion. So
they're going to hold the
do
other
that.
ones for ransom. They got to know where to send the ransom note.
You can contact me through themeparkpress.com, and you can also contact me through mouseplanet.com, where this week I have a column about all of the handprints and footprints in the forecourt of the Chinese theater at Disney Studios, and the history behind those, and whether those will remain there now that we've got Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway.
Oh, I really hope so.
I got to see them in person for my little preview of the attraction, so fingers crossed it sticks around. But in the meantime, Jim, you know the drill. You're our special guest. So do you have a closing quote for us today?
Yes, I do. And again, I always want to come up with something that's a little out of the ordinary, but something that is Walt oriented. So I've got today a quote from a letter that Walt Disney sent to the Kansas City Public Library in conjunction with the American Libraries Association meeting held there. And this is in Kansas City, Missouri. This is from August 17th, 1937. This is just an excerpt from the letter. And he said, "All during the early years of my youth and a long time before I had given a career any thought, the public library has always held a tremendous interest for me. Needless to say, any book that offered information on drawing was likely to be found listed on my card, and overdue books were the chief reason for my usually depleted bank account. I feel the public library has been a very definite help to me all through my career." And I will tell you this, some of the books we're talking about, you can find at your local library, or most libraries have interlibrary loans. So if they don't have it, they will track down a library that has that book and have it shipped to that library. So, and I just love the Glendale Public Library. A wonderful sanctuary and a wonderful treasure trove of just wandering through the aisles and trying to learn the Dewey Decimal System. That's my quote.
Thank you. That is definitely a quote we've never heard before, so we love a rare quote to complement this rare collection of books that we were able to discuss today. Thank you again.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to share this with all of the listeners, and may all your Disney dreams come true.
Aw, thanks, guys. Bye.
Happy reading, listeners.
The Mouse Club has no affiliation with the Walt Disney Company. The views and opinions expressed by hosts and participants are theirs and theirs alone. They do not represent the organizations or companies they happen to work for.